Stop wasting our time. You don't belong here. Clara. Weiss's voice cut across the marble lobby, her finger stabbing the air toward Derek Johnson as his portfolio crashed to the floor, papers scattering like fallen feathers. Customers stared, some whispering,
I'm sorry, I have an
some
appointment.
smirking as the security guard stepped closer, hand hovering near his radio. Derek's jaw tightened his silence louder than her insults.
Have a seat, please.
Because she had no idea who she had just humiliated. What would you have done in Derek's place? Tell me your thoughts. I'd love to hear your perspective. The lobby of the Zurich Central Bank gleamed with polished marble floors and glass walls that caught the morning sun, giving everything a cold, pristine glow. Businessmen in tailored suits and women in sleek dresses moved with purpose, their conversations clipped and efficient as if time itself belonged to them. At precisely 9:15 a.m., Derek Johnson stepped through the revolving doors. He was dressed sharply, but without flash, a dark navy suit, crisp white shirt, modest tie. His leather shoes shone, yet his overall appearance carried no hint of ostentation. He looked like a man who valued precision, someone who knew where he was going, but did not need to broadcast it. Still, in a place where status was everything, understatement was often mistaken for insignificance. Behind the reception desk, Clara Weiss scanned the growing crowd with an expression of thinly veiled irritation. At only 35, she had risen quickly through the ranks, known for her efficiency and ruthless attention to detail. She thrived in Zurich's elite banking culture. She prided herself on knowing who mattered. To her wealth was obvious it was in the wristwatch, the cut of a suit, the kind of shoes a man wore. When Derek approached, offering a polite smile, she barely glanced up. "Good morning," Derek said evenly. "I have a scheduled appointment with your investment division." Derek Johnson. Clara's manicured fingers tapped at her keyboard. She frowned, her lips tightening. "There's no appointment under that name. Perhaps you're mistaken." Derek's voice remained calm, though the surrounding hum of conversations seemed to pause. "It may be under Johnson Global Ventures. I confirmed the meeting yesterday." Clara didn't bother looking again. Everyone thinks they have an appointment when they want to skip the line. Her tone sharpened loud enough for those nearby to hear. "You'll need to wait with the others." Heads turned. A few customers raised their brows. The words carried a sting of dismissal, the kind of public rebuke that strips dignity in an instant. Derek felt the weight of their eyes, the familiar calculation. Does this man belong here? His jaw tightened, but his posture remained straight. He nodded once and took a seat in a hard plastic chair against the wall. Time dragged. An older gentleman in a gray suit approached the desk. Clara rose from behind the counter, her demeanor instantly transformed. "Mr. Reinhardt, so good to see you again." She escorted him personally to an office. Minutes later, a young blonde woman entered, speaking hurriedly about a train she was about to miss. Clara waved her forward with indulgence. "Of course, let's get you through quickly." Derek watched silent as one client after another bypassed him. An hour passed, then 2. The chairs emptied and filled again. His name was never called. Each time Derek stood politely to inquire, Clara's dismissive hand or cutting tone drove him back to his seat. Her voice was sharp enough to carry across the room. "You'll have to wait your turn. Your time is not more valuable than anyone else's. But when she added, "People like you always think you can bend the rules," the air in the lobby seemed to freeze. A woman with shopping bags shifted uncomfortably, averting her gaze. A man coughed and buried his face in his phone. Derek breathed slowly, willing himself to remain composed. He had faced this before, at airports, at hotels, in restaurants, where service came reluctantly. Still, each incident left a sting. It was not just the words, but the public theater of it, the subtle encouragement for others to view him with suspicion. The humiliation was meant to be witnessed, and it was. A security guard began hovering nearby, summoned by Clara's subtle nod. "Keep an eye on him," she said loudly enough that Derek heard. The guard's stance stiffened, one hand brushing the edge of his radio. Derek turned his gaze forward, refusing to react. His hands rested lightly on the portfolio, balanced on his lap, the weight of carefully prepared documents pressing into his palm. Inside were proposals and agreements that could reshape entire divisions of this bank, yet here, in this moment, they were invisible. He was invisible. Finally, after 3 hours, Derek rose once more. The crowd had thinned. The high shine of the marble seemed colder, now the silence heavier. He approached the counter, setting the portfolio gently before him. His voice was steady, measured. "I have been waiting patiently. I am now significantly past my scheduled appointment. May I speak to another manager, please?" Clara did not look up immediately. Her fingers tapped deliberately against the keys. When she finally raised her eyes, her gaze swept over him in a long, appraising arc, pausing at his suit, his tie, his shoes. She exhaled sharply. "I am the highest authority here today. If you're unhappy with our service, perhaps another bank would be more appropriate. There's a community branch down the street. You might find it more welcoming." The implication landed like a stone dropped in water, rippling through the room. No one spoke, but their silence carried its own judgment. Derek felt the sting in his chest, a slow burn that was both familiar and exhausting. His throat tightened, but his voice remained even. "I will wait a little longer." He collected his documents and returned to his seat. Behind his calm exterior, something shifted. His phone vibrated softly in his pocket. Without drawing attention, he unlocked it and typed a short message, "Proceed." Then he slipped it away again. His face betrayed nothing. To the casual eye, he was simply another man waiting in line, tolerated but not respected, a shadow in a room that refused to see him. Only he knew that the real waiting game was almost over. Derek Johnson's silence in the bank lobby was not weakness, nor was it resignation. It was discipline, cultivated over years of learning when to speak and when to withhold, when to fight and when to wait. Behind that still exterior was a life marked by struggle, ambition, and choices that had shaped him into one of the most influential figures in modern business. The people who now dismissed him would never have guessed the story that carried him into that chair. He was born on the south side of Atlanta, the eldest of 3 children. His father, a factory worker with tired hands and a strong back, died when Derek was only 10. His mother worked nights at a hospital cleaning floors while trying to keep her family together. Derek carried those memories with him, always the long evenings spent helping his younger siblings with homework at the kitchen table. The silence of a house where exhaustion hung heavier than the air. It was there, in the quiet of those nights, that Derek decided he would change the trajectory of his life, not only for himself, but for everyone who carried the same weight of invisibility. Education was his way out. He earned scholarships, worked side jobs, and spent summers repairing old computers to save money. By the time he reached university, he had already built a reputation as someone who refused to quit, no matter how steep the climb. Later came graduate studies. Then his first venture, a small company repairing outdated hospital equipment and reselling it at lower prices to clinics that could not afford new machines. That business grew into something more ambitious, an enterprise dedicated to developing affordable, renewable energy technologies for rural communities. What started with refurbished equipment turned into patents, partnerships, and eventually global recognition. By his early 40s, Derek Johnson was not merely successful. He was a visionary with holdings that stretched across continents. His ventures in renewable energy and technology had drawn the attention of governments and international investors. He had been invited to speak at the World Economic Forum, consulted on infrastructure projects in Africa and Asia, and was sought after by leaders who saw him not only as a businessman, but as a thinker. Yet he remained understated in everything he did. Wealth for him was never about spectacle. He drove himself, when possible, preferred suits without labels, and kept his watch modest. He believed that real influence did not require adornment. Still, there was another reason for his humility. He knew how quickly appearances determine treatment. In boardrooms, in restaurants, on flights, he had been mistaken for an assistant, ignored when introductions were made, passed over by service staff until someone whispered his name and titles. Those moments were a quiet reminder that the world often weighed skin color heavier than any resume. He had learned to endure those small humiliations without letting them provoke him into anger that would only reinforce prejudice. His restraint was deliberate, a shield against being reduced to someone else's stereotype. In Zurich, his purpose was clear. He had come not to test the waters, but to finalize an investment that would reshape the bank's digital future. His portfolio contained the blueprint for a partnership worth billions. If completed, it would not only expand his reach, but also secure Zurich Central Bank against looming foreign competition. Yet he had chosen to arrive without entourage or announcement. He wanted to see the institution for what it truly was, to witness firsthand how its people treated those they did not recognize. He believed that culture mattered more than architecture, and that a bank built on exclusion could not be trusted with his vision. As he sat quietly in the lobby, each slight from Clara Weiss and each dismissive glance from those around him confirmed more than prejudice, they revealed the institution's character. It was not a question of one manager's arrogance, but a culture that rewarded appearances over substance. Derek's silence was not passivity. It was observation. Every word Clara spoke, every gesture she made, was being recorded in his mind as evidence. Her refusal to check the system, her willingness to elevate others over him without reason, her tone that dripped with contempt, all of it mattered. And though no one around him knew, her actions would soon be measured against the weight of decisions that could alter the future of her career and her bank. The phone in his pocket buzzed once a reminder of the network that existed just beyond those marble walls. His executive team was scattered across time zones waiting for his signal. With a single message, operations had already begun. Teams in London, New York, and Johannesburg were on calls, legal advisors preparing analysts, tracking market shifts. The man Clara believed was a nuisance waiting to cause trouble was in fact orchestrating a movement larger than anyone in that lobby could imagine. Yet even with all his resources, Derek thought of his mother mopping hospital floors and his father's calloused hands. He thought of his siblings, now teachers and nurses, and of the countless people who would never step foot in such a bank because they assumed the doors were not meant for them. He remembered what it felt like to be young and invisible, to feel as though opportunity was always meant for someone else. That memory kept him rooted in patience. He did not need to prove himself to Clara or the customers who watched with curiosity. His proof existed in every contract, every innovation, every life touched by the businesses he had built. But he also understood the power of moments like these when arrogance collides with reality in a way that cannot be denied. So he waited, his back straight, his eyes steady, his silence deliberate. To anyone watching, he was simply a man wasting hours in a bank lobby, tolerated only because security had not yet found cause to remove him. But within that silence was a storm gathering one that would soon sweep through the institution and leave its mark on every person who thought they knew who Derek Johnson was. The marble lobby of Zurich Central Bank had grown quieter as the afternoon pressed on. Derek Johnson still sat in the same chair, posture, steady eyes fixed ahead. To most in the room, he was just a man who had overstayed his welcome, tolerated out of politeness, suspected of wasting time. Clara Weiss had stopped glancing his way. In her mind, the matter was settled. The man could wait forever if he wanted, it would not change a thing. She had clients who mattered, clients who fit the image of importance. Outside, the muted roar of the city went on as usual, trams rattling down Bahnhofstrasse, tourists with cameras crossing the busy intersection, the hum of a city that prided itself on order. Then breaking through the rhythm came the low purr of a black Maybach gliding to a halt at the curb. Its polished surface reflected the pale blue sky. The driver stepped out crisp, in a tailored uniform, opening the rear door with quiet precision. A team of assistants followed close behind, carrying sleek leather cases stamped with the insignia of Johnson Global Ventures. Their arrival did not go unnoticed. People in the lobby turned whispers, rising like a breeze as the entourage entered, purposeful and urgent. Clara straightened at the sight, sensing the importance of these newcomers. She hurried forward, her smile automatic, ready to offer them the respect she withheld from Derek. "Welcome to Zurich Central Bank." She began adjusting her blazer. But before she could launch into her practiced introduction, one of the assistants asked in clipped English, "Where is Mr. Johnson? He should have been escorted upstairs 2 hours ago." The name struck the air like glass shattering. Every head turned toward the quiet figure still seated by the wall. Derek rose slowly, his expression calm, but his presence commanding. The assistants rushed to his side, one of them murmuring apologies for the delay, another checking his schedule. Clara's face drained of color, the confident smile evaporating as the realization struck. This was not a man wasting time. This was the man. The next moment arrived like a thunderclap. From the elevators, the head of international banking, Klaus Vogel, emerged in a rush, his normally composed features tight with panic. He spotted Derek immediately and hurried forward, his voice carrying across the lobby. "Mr. Johnson, please forgive us. We've been waiting for you upstairs. There has clearly been a terrible mistake." He turned on Clara, his tone sharp, cutting through the silence. "Clara, what have you done?" The lobby seemed to hold its breath. Customers who had watched the earlier exchanges now stared wide-eyed, the weight of what they were witnessing settling in. The man they had seen dismissed, doubted, and shadowed by security was in fact the bank's most important guest. Clara stammered, words failing her. I didn't realize." He didn't look, but the excuses stuck in her throat, flimsy even before they were spoken. Derek did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. His calm carried more power than shouting ever could. He stepped forward, his assistants falling respectfully behind him. "I am here to finalize an investment that could shape the future of this institution." He set his voice, even but clear enough for every corner of the lobby to hear. "But before I entrust billions to your bank, I needed to understand how you treat the people who walk through your doors with nothing but their dignity." The words struck deeper than any reprimand. The customers watching those who had seen Clara's dismissal, who had witnessed the security guard's quiet suspicion, shifted uncomfortably, shame creeping across their faces. Some looked at Derek with newfound respect, others with regret for their own silence. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she reached for composure. "Mr. Johnson, if I had known, that is the problem." Derek interrupted, his tone, still controlled, but edged with steel. "Respect should not depend on what you know of someone's wealth. It should not be granted only to those who fit your picture of importance." The guard who had shadowed Derek now stepped back, his eyes downcast. The receptionist, pale with shock, avoided meeting Derek's gaze. The silence that followed was heavier than anything Clara had orchestrated earlier. It was the weight of truth revealed. Klaus Vogel bowed slightly, a gesture rare in the stiff culture of Swiss banking. "Mr. Johnson, allow me to personally escort you to the boardroom. We are deeply sorry." Derek held his gaze for a long moment, then inclined his head. "Very well." He gathered his portfolio, the same one Clara had treated as irrelevant, and walked toward the elevators. As he passed, a ripple of whispers followed astonishment, admiration, even applause from a few who could not contain their recognition of what had just unfolded. Clara remained rooted behind the desk, her face flushed, her authority dissolved. The hierarchy she relied on had inverted in an instant. The man she mocked had revealed himself not as a nuisance, but as the very lifeline of the bank she served. The echo of his words lingered, a judgment not only of her actions, but of a culture that measured worth by appearances. In that moment, the lobby itself seemed transformed. What had begun as a stage for humiliation had become a courtroom where arrogance stood trial and was found wanting. And Derek Johnson, without raising his voice, had unmasked not only Clara Weiss, but the truth about the institution she represented. The boardroom of Zurich Central Bank was silent except for the soft rustle of papers and the ticking of an ornate clock on the wall. Executives sat in polished leather chairs, shifting uneasily as Derek Johnson placed his portfolio on the table with deliberate calm. Only hours earlier, they had assumed he was late, perhaps unreliable. Now they saw the truth. He was not only punctual, but purposeful, and their own institution had been found lacking. Derek opened the portfolio, sliding a set of documents toward the directors. "This," he began, his voice steady but commanding, "is the plan I intended to present this morning. A partnership valued at over 3 billion francs, designed to transform your digital banking division and expand your global reach. But before we speak of numbers, let us speak of values. What occurred downstairs was not merely a personal insult. It was an indictment of culture." The executives exchanged glances, their discomfort palpable. Clara Weiss, summoned to the boardroom as well, sat at the far end of the table. Her once confident posture collapsed into a defensive hunch. Her cheeks were flushed, her hands clasped tightly together. She tried to meet Derek's gaze, but the weight of his presence was too much. Klaus Vogel cleared his throat. "Mr. Johnson, we are deeply embarrassed. Clara's actions were inexcusable. We are prepared to issue a formal apology and assure you this behavior does not represent Zurich Central Bank as a whole." Derek's eyes did not soften. "An apology addresses appearances. What I witnessed was not a single manager's lapse, but a symptom of something deeper. Every client should be treated with respect, regardless of how wealthy they appear. If your institution cannot uphold that standard, then no investment, no matter how large, can succeed here." The room tightened with tension. Executives who prided themselves on control now felt cornered, their reputations teetering on the edge of scandal. A few began to murmur, but Derek lifted a hand, and the voices ceased. "I want to make this clear," he continued. "I did not come here seeking retribution. I came to build. Yet building requires a foundation, and the foundation of any financial institution must be trust. Without it, your vaults may as well be empty." He turned his gaze toward Clara, whose eyes glistened with fear. "You dismissed me because you believed I was unworthy of your attention. You judged me by your own narrow image of wealth. If I had been a small business owner seeking a loan or a family trying to open their first account, how would they have been treated? Would they be humiliated in front of strangers, made to feel invisible in a place meant to safeguard their future?" Clara opened her mouth as if to defend herself, then closed it again, her voice trapped in her throat. The silence that followed was louder than any argument she could have made. One of the older directors shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Johnson, what do you propose?" Derek leaned forward, his voice low but resonant. "Accountability, transparency, change. If Zurich Central Bank wishes to partner with me, then this institution must prove it can serve all people with dignity, not just those who arrive in luxury cars or tailored suits. That means reevaluating your training, your leadership, and your priorities." The weight of his words pressed into the room, undeniable and inescapable. Clara's career, once so promising, now seemed to unravel with each second. She spoke finally, her tone desperate. "I didn't know who you were." If I had known, Derek cut her off with a glance. "That is exactly the point. Respect cannot depend on recognition. Integrity is revealed in how you treat the least powerful, not the most. If you fail in that, then your wealth is hollow." The executives bowed their heads slightly, some out of shame, others calculating the damage if this incident reached the press. They knew the truth. One word from Derek could shatter their stock value, could bring headlines that would stain their reputation across Europe and beyond. Yet Derek did not raise his voice, nor did he make threats. His calm authority carried more weight than fury ever could. "This bank stands at a crossroads," he said. "You can choose to protect your image, or you can choose to transform your culture. The former will be fleeting. The latter will define your legacy." The clock ticked on each second, drawing them closer to a reckoning none of them had anticipated when the day began. Clara Weiss lowered her eyes, the realization of her downfall settling heavy on her shoulders. Around her colleagues avoided looking her way, unwilling to share the burden of her disgrace. Klaus Vogel finally nodded, his voice strained but resolute. "Mr. Johnson, you are right. We must do more than apologize. We must act. I will call for an immediate review of our practices and initiate reforms. You have my word." Derek studied him for a long moment, then gathered his documents. "Words are not enough. Prove it." He stood his presence filling the room and walked toward the door. Each step echoed against the polished floor, a reminder that his dignity had not been diminished by their prejudice. Instead, it had revealed their flaws more starkly than any report ever could. As the door closed behind him, the boardroom erupted into a storm of whispers. Some spoke of damage control, others of resignation letters, still others of strategies to prevent the story from leaking. But beneath their frantic voices lay a quiet truth. The reckoning had come, and it was of their own making. In the lobby below, the same customers who had witnessed Derek's humiliation now whispered a different story. The man they had seen dismissed as irrelevant had revealed himself as a force their bank could not ignore. The lesson lingered, etched into the marble walls, like an unspoken warning. Never again mistake humility for insignificance, nor silence for absence of power. And for Clara Weiss, the humiliation she had so easily cast upon another had returned to her with brutal clarity, leaving her to confront a truth she had spent her career avoiding, that arrogance, once unmasked, has no refuge. Weeks turned into months, and Zurich Central Bank was no longer the same institution that Derek Johnson had walked into on that unforgettable morning. The humiliation he endured had forced open a door the board could no longer shut, and once the reckoning had passed, the slow, arduous work of transformation began. What was once a lobby, defined by polished marble and silent judgment, now became the entry point for change, a place where dignity was no longer a privilege reserved for the chosen few, but a right extended to everyone. The reforms began quietly, but with determination. Staff were retrained not through dry lectures or perfunctory seminars, but through programs designed to confront uncomfortable truths. Employees sat together in workshops where stories of bias and exclusion were read aloud, not as statistics, but as lived experiences. A teller from Nigeria shared how her qualifications had been questioned repeatedly before she was hired, though she had been more educated than most of her peers. A middle-aged client told of being denied a mortgage despite perfect credit, only to be approved once a white colleague applied for the same loan. These testimonies shook the staff in ways corporate slides never could. They could no longer pretend prejudice was an isolated problem. Derek did not vanish after the confrontation. Instead, he became both an investor and a partner in transformation. He worked with Klaus Vogel and the board, insisting on transparency. Quarterly reports were published not only for profits, but for equity measures, approval rates across demographics, average wait times, satisfaction scores. For the first time, Zurich Central Bank allowed itself to be measured not only by balance sheets, but by fairness. Some executives resisted grumbling about the costs of compliance and the risks of bad publicity, but Derek reminded them with unyielding calm that the greatest risk was doing nothing. Trust is your true currency, he said in one meeting. Without it, you are bankrupt before a single franc is lost. The cultural shift rippled outward. Customers began to notice small but significant changes, greetings that felt warmer, a willingness to explain procedures without condescension, a leveling of attention between clients in suits and clients in work clothes. The lobby where Derek had once been told to wait became a space redesigned for openness, with fewer barriers and more transparency. Posters on the walls celebrated diversity not as token slogans, but as commitments backed by action. Branch managers were evaluated not just by revenue, but by inclusivity scores, and those who resisted the change found themselves replaced. For Clara Weiss, the fall had been swift. Her termination was not announced with fanfare, but the absence of her sharp voice at the reception desk was noticeable. At first, she fought to defend herself, insisting she had been scapegoated. Yet over time, stripped of the armor of authority, she was forced to face the reality of what her arrogance had cost her. Away from the bank, she entered a period of silence, not unlike Derek's in that lobby, though hers was born of reflection rather than discipline. Months later, rumors spread that she had begun volunteering at a small financial literacy nonprofit, a quiet attempt at redemption. Whether it was genuine contrition or an effort to rebuild her reputation, few could say. But for Derek, it was proof that even those who fall hardest can learn if they choose to. Derek himself channeled the incident into something larger than personal vindication. He founded the Global Dignity Foundation, aimed at ensuring financial institutions worldwide recognized equity as both a moral imperative and a business necessity. The foundation created scholarships for young people from marginalized communities to pursue careers in finance, ensuring the next generation would not simply fight for a seat at the table, but would help build new tables altogether. At conferences, Derek spoke not of his humiliation, but of the lessons it carried. Power, he told audiences of bankers and policymakers, is not measured by how you treat the powerful. It is measured by how you treat the powerless. The story of that day in Zurich spread beyond Switzerland. Newspapers recounted how a man once treated as an intruder revealed himself as the bank's largest investor. Social media turned the incident into a parable, a modern tale of prejudice overturned by truth. Critics dissected what it said about wealth and race in Europe, while ordinary readers took from it a simpler lesson: never underestimate the quiet man in the room. Derek's silence had become legend, a symbol of strength and restraint, proof that dignity could dismantle arrogance without raising its voice. Inside Zurich Central Bank, the effects were undeniable. Within a year, customer satisfaction among minority clients had risen by nearly 40%. Loan approval rates stabilized across demographics, revealing that what had once been deemed risk management was often just bias in disguise. Profitability, far from declining, grew steadily as new communities chose Zurich Central Bank for their services. By serving those who had long been overlooked, the institution tapped into markets competitors had ignored. Derek's prophecy had proven true trust was indeed the most valuable currency. The transformation was not without struggle. There were moments of backlash, employees who rolled their eyes at the training executives, who muttered about Derek's influence. But each challenge only reinforced the importance of persistence. Change, Derek often reminded them, was not an event, but a process. It required vigilance, honesty, and the willingness to confront mistakes openly. 1 year after the incident, Derek returned to Zurich. He entered the lobby not as an invisible figure waiting for recognition, but as a partner greeted with respect by every staff member present. The marble floors were the same, but the atmosphere had changed. Where once he had felt eyes judging him, now he saw eyes meeting him. He shook hands with Vogel, now a champion of the reforms, and nodded approvingly at the new diversity officer, a woman who had once feared speaking up. The space that had humiliated him had become a symbol of what was possible when arrogance yielded to accountability. That evening, Derek addressed a group of young entrepreneurs gathered in a community hall nearby. They were men and women who had struggled to access capital, who had been told their ideas were too risky, their profiles unconvincing. Derek listened to their stories, offering advice connecting them to the very programs he had helped create. When he spoke, his words carried the same quiet power that had once stilled a bank lobby. The world will not always see your worth at first glance, he told them. Do not let that blind you to it yourself. Your dignity is not theirs to grant or to take. It is yours to protect. As the applause rose, Derek felt the weight of that day, a year earlier, lift slightly from his shoulders. What had begun as humiliation had become a catalyst, a turning point, not only for a bank, but for an entire conversation about equity in finance. He had not sought revenge, and he had not needed to shout. His silence had spoken louder than anger, and his actions had carved a path for others to follow. The transformation was not just Zurich Central Bank's, it was his as well. He had turned pain into purpose, insult into influence, and in doing so had proven a truth that would echo far beyond Switzerland. True wealth is not in what you own, but in how you use it to change the world around you. Derek Johnson's story began with humiliation, but ended with transformation, not only of a man, but of an institution. In the grand lobby of Zurich Central Bank, he was mocked, dismissed, and treated as if his time and dignity had no value. Yet instead of reacting with anger, he chose silence and patience, allowing arrogance to reveal itself in full. What no one realized in those painful hours was that Derek was not simply a man waiting in line. He was the bank's most significant investor, a visionary with the resources to alter its future. When the truth was unveiled, the very walls that had echoed with disdain became witnesses to accountability and reform. Clara Weiss, who had embodied the culture of exclusion, faced her downfall, while the bank's leadership was forced to reckon with its values. What followed was more than damage control. It was rebirth. Derek's insistence on equity pushed Zurich Central Bank to confront systemic prejudice, to retrain its staff to open its doors with fairness, and to measure success not only by profit but by trust. The man who had once been invisible became the architect of lasting change, proving that true wealth lies not in what you possess, but in how you use it to build a better world. The lesson for us is powerful and timely. Never allow someone else's perception to define your worth. In our lives, there will be moments when we are underestimated, judged, or dismissed. The way we respond in those moments determines whether insult becomes bitterness or transformation. Like Derek, we can choose restraint, clarity, and purpose. We can turn adversity into opportunity, and in doing so, we not only affirm our own dignity, but inspire change in the systems around us. If Derek's journey resonated with you, if it reminded you of the strength that comes from patience and the power of demanding respect through action, then stand with us. Subscribe to this channel so we can continue sharing stories that challenge injustice, celebrate courage, and spark conversations that matter. Your support fuels our mission to bring more voices, more lessons, and more change to light.